Dr. Anthony Harper here, blessed to be with Dr. Simone Gold. Thank you, Dr. Gold, for joining me to talk about a lot of crucial issues. And I know for our listeners, they'll really be interested to know about what led up to President Trump pardoning you and so many others regarding January 6th.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. Yes, so during the dark days of COVID, I was a board certified emergency physician working on the front lines, and I noticed a lot of discrepancy between the facts on the ground, the things I knew to be true as a physician and was observing as a physician, and what the government was saying. And so starting in 2020, I started pushing back on the government propaganda and disinformation campaign. And I started speaking all over the nation. Because of that, I became somewhat well known, and I started leading a large nonprofit, America's Frontline Doctors. And as part of that effort, I was due to speak at the Capitol January 6, 2021, on the subject I speak on, which is medical freedom. It is true that the overwhelming, or maybe all the people there that day were there to protest the election, but I was actually there as an invited guest speaker with a permit to speak on medical freedom, because I know that if we lose our freedom over, our health and our body, that's a violation, in my opinion, of God's law. That's an inalienable right that we have, and that's what I've been speaking on. And that day, of course, did not go as planned. We now know that there was a lot of complexity, and there were, in my opinion, it was a Fedsurrection. It was set up by nefarious actors in the federal government to derail the election, et cetera. But when I was there that day, I got caught up in the throng of crowd. And when I was standing on the Capitol steps, the doors opened from the inside. And you can see video of me where I tumbled inside due to a crowd surge behind me. And of course, while inside, I am who I am. So I was peaceful, and I was between the ropes and all of that. And I exited the building, short time later. And frankly, I didn't think that much of it. But as we know, January 6th was the watershed moment for our nation. And it was claimed by the media that this was an insurrection. And I became targeted by the government. And 12 days after January 6th, when I was back home in my apartment in Los Angeles, I was subjected to the most violent FBI SWAT raid imaginable. Huge team of officers in tactical gear and weapons pointed at my chest. Those red laser sight beams on my chest, and screaming at the top of their lungs. They treated me like I was a member of like a Colombia drug cartel or El Chapo family member. It was absolutely outrageous. And I just want to share with the audience that in addition to being a physician, I'm also an attorney, and I was kind of watching all of this unfold and being absolutely horrified at the collapse of the rule of law. I mean, why in the world did the federal government send a violent FBI SWAT team to arrest me for what was, by their own perspective, a misdemeanor trespass? So a lot of things happened due to that day, but my life radically changed. I was arrested. I was put through the judicial system. I was targeted by Congress. I was targeted by my medical boards. The California Medical Board targeted me. The New York Bar tried to punish me. A lot of people tried to come after me, and I've had to fight them all off. But of course, just, one of the biggest threats was the DC judges and the DC jury system, and who has no sympathy for political conservatives or people of faith. And I ended up taking a plea for a misdemeanor trespass. Now, I'm a nonviolent, first-time misdemeanant. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a mom, I'm a citizen, I have a great professional reputation. Nevertheless, the judge decided to throw me into prison for 60 days. And I just want people to think about that and reflect on that. How did we get here as a nation that you could put someone like me in prison? And then not only prison, Dr. Harper, it was a maximum security prison. So I was in a pretty dangerous place, and I was there for 60 days. And, when I got out, I decided just to keep doing my work, keep speaking for medical freedom and advocacy, and America's Frontline Doctors pushed ahead. And I think we are, part of the reason that we have a new administration. People were sick of what they endured and what they lived through.
How did President Trump hear about you, and
Oh.
how did he end up pardoning you?
Yeah, so it was very interesting. We were all kind of waiting to see what would happen. President Trump on the campaign trail, he recognized that January 6th defendants, or I should say January 6th political protesters and political hostages, were treated very differently than political protesters throughout our nation's history. We have a very, very strong, robust history in our nation of political protests. We've had some that have turned quite dangerous. I mean, the Summer of Love and the summer of 2020 had a fair amount of violence and people killed and police cars that were bombed, with Molotov cocktails, et cetera. And still we don't prosecute those people because we have such a strong history of respecting political protests. So President Trump knew that we, J6 political protesters, were being treated very differently. And he promised to correct that. And on his first day in office, he wrote an executive order that pardoned all J6 defendants, with the exception of 14, which he commuted, meaning he let them out of prison, but reserved the right to determine if they should be fully pardoned or not. The reason this was an excellent move, that he pardoned really 100% of us, is because the entire process by which we were tried was completely unfair. That is actually the subject of my book, which is called Selective Persecution. We were subjected to processes that Americans have never been subjected to in the past. Never, ever would a person like me, who was walking peacefully, compliantly within the ropes, no violence, don't touch anyone, ever would a person like that have been. Honestly, they rarely arrested, but if arrested, the charges were always dropped, certainly never prosecuted, not convicted, and certainly never sent to prison. So Donald Trump did the right thing by exonerating, pardoning all of us, because he understood that the process was corrupted. And so I was one of the people that got pardoned. On a practical level, it does not have much influence on my life because I can't get, the time back and the targeting back by the government. But I appreciate what he did. And it's very important for the nation to start understanding what really happened on J6, and the complete pardons of the entire 1,500 plus of us is a really good step towards that understanding.
And have you ever worked with or helped President Trump before? I think about and what's coming up about a new pardon parole system. Have you been invited to help in that way in any way?
I want to share with everybody that the most important legislation that's come through in terms of our judicial system in many years, I think decades, was affecting the Bureau of Prison, and it's called the First Step Act. I don't know if it rings a bell to you, but I think it was 2018 or so, 2019 maybe. That was instituted by President Trump, who recognized that our justice system is not treating people justly. So I was a direct witness to that as a prisoner. Sometimes I wonder if God put me there, because I was able to then write of what I directly observed. So I do think it's on President Trump's radar screen to do the most he can to improve our justice system. That means addressing the weaponization of the Department of Justice. Ideally, it would mean also looking at the Bureau of Prison, which was treated J6 prisoners horrifically. And we'll see. I have not directly worked with the president on these things, but he's clearly on his radar screen because he's brought in, Attorney General Pam Bondi, and he's brought in Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, and District of Columbia Attorney Ed Martin. All four of those people are very familiar with weaponization of government that happened against political conservatives.
Well, Dr. Gold, how has RFK Jr. Has it been associated in any way with American Frontline Doctors, and what is your relationship with RFK Jr.?
Yes, so I had the honor and pleasure, distinction of getting to know RFK Jr. fairly well since 2020. What I will say for sure, he's very bright. He's also very kind. He cares deeply for our nation. He's driven by a sense of true justice. He was extremely bothered for decades now that parents of vaccine injured children were just being ignored. When he got into that battle of looking at the vaccine issue, it wasn't his battle. he had a heart, as many of the Kennedys did, because they created the Special Olympics. He had a heart for children who were hurt. As a young boy, he shared with me that he worked on the Special Olympics. That was an initiative that came from his family. And over the summers, he would work for the Special Olympics. And so he's kind of had that heart. And so this is why he got into that space. So he's a person of high integrity and a lot of subject matter expertise when it comes to an issue I care a lot about, which is regulatory capture, which is when our government agencies are captured by the industries they're supposed to be regulating. Specifically, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, has kind of a revolving door with Big Pharma. So people go, they work for the FDA, and then as soon as they leave working for the FDA, then they go work for Moderna or Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson. And you can't expect these people in their government positions to have seriously regulated their industry. So he's an expert on regulatory capture. And I have high expectations for the impact he'll have, on American health, quite frankly.
It's been a very intense time during that COVID virus time, and what you went through, and so many Americans. Where are you at right now regarding the whole vaccine issue, whether it's a COVID virus or some other things?
Yeah, that is a great question. I always like to start with I didn't really have a dog in this fight. I was an ER physician and I didn't question vaccines. I've always had every vaccine I was supposed to have, my children as well. I approved for them to get all their shots. But the COVID shot was an entirely different matter for many, many reasons. The most obvious is you cannot produce a safe product with a new technology that rapidly. I'm sorry, I reject that premise out of hand. So it was new technology, never been used in this way before. And the quickest a vaccine had ever been released to the public, I think, was the mumps vaccine. That was 4 years. Vaccines typically take 10 to 15 years if they succeed. As you may know, Anthony Fauci was working on an AIDS vaccine for more than 30 years, never got there. So, off the top, did I think you could produce a brand new product that was completely safe for the public? No. It also violated basic public health 101. You don't vaccinate an entire population in the middle of a respiratory pandemic. There's big scientific reasons why you never do that, but it is known to worsen the situation for the entire public. There was that. There was also the thing I cared most about, which is our government was forcing people to do it. They came this close to pretty much making it a law in the sense that the coercion was so aggressive. Employers were given the right to just kind of twist the arm of the employee. And I very much feared that we were going to have a, quote, vaccine passport system, which is like a social credit score system. And that is what America's frontline doctors pushed back hard on. We brought many lawsuits to make sure that vaccine mandates didn't become the law of the land. Now, it turned out that these shots were terrible. But most importantly, we cannot mandate medical treatments for humans. We got rid of that with the Nuremberg Code back in the 40s and 50s. This was outrageous.
What would you like to see going forward as far as, regarding making America healthy again?
Yes. There's a few things you can do specifically, and I'm hoping Robert Kennedy does these things. One is I think we need to eliminate direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising on television and on advertising platforms. It has radically changed the practice of medicine when we're just selling drugs directly to consumers who then go to their doctors and their doctors are just prescribing. That I share with you, America is one of only 2 nations across the world that permits such advertising. And we only started to do that in it was either the 1980s or the 1990s. So I hope he abolishes that. I hope he brings liability. I hope he eliminates the liability protection that vaccine manufacturers enjoy. What do I mean? Anytime someone makes a product, they need to be held to the standard that they should be able to be sued if their product is faulty. No one would dream of buying a car that, if something went wrong with the car, the engine fell out, you couldn't sue the car manufacturer. That's crazy. But vaccine manufacturers have what's called a liability shield. that incentivizes the vaccine manufacturers not to make the products perfectly safe. I am not one who believes Big Pharma is evil. I believe they're following their own self-interest. And when Congress gave them this liability shield, they simply didn't have to make their products as safe as could be. So I believe Robert Kennedy would be looking at that. And then, of course, he's passionate about looking at the real root causes of why we're so unhealthy as a nation. We have much lower life expectancy than you would expect for a very affluent first world nation. We have rampant childhood obesity, rampant adult obesity, diabetes, et cetera. So I'm looking forward to these next few years.
It's going to be quite a ride here. With so many changes very quickly. And for people to know more information about what you're involved with, about your book, how people can, there's a website or some other resources for people to know about.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I write a lot about this, and my book is coming out in April, and it is Selective Persecution. You can find it on Amazon. I hope you can put the link up. And if they're looking for a better solution going forward for themselves, for their own health, the Revolutionary Medical Freedom Platform, my last name Gold, goldcare.com, where we give you all this information. We have free medical town halls where we discuss these things all the time with amazing experts. So, and please follow me on X. I sometimes still say Twitter, on X, Dr. Simone Gold.
Dr. Gold, thank you for joining our audience today, and look forward to hearing the developments about how to make America healthy again. And thank you.
Thank you so much.